people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Towards the end of this month, on the 29th, Nazarena Romero, unbeaten up-and-comer from Argentina in the women's super bantamweight division, will be returning to action opposite the ring Julieta Cardozo for the second time. For those not already aware, Nazarena Romero already fought Julieta and already beat Julieta.
This is a rematch.
So I'm not sure there's actually a need for one. This is also for the WBA Fedelatin title.
A lesser version of a WBA title that will bring Nazarena Romero one step closer to fighting for the full version of it.
Nazarena Romero, who sports a professional record of 12 wins with no losses, no draws, 6 knockouts.
To Julieta Cardozo, who sports a professional record of 12 wins with 7 losses, no draws,
1 recorded knockout, having been knocked out 2 times.
coming right off of 4 consecutive losses.
Making this fight a bit of a formality fight, a takeover fight, keep busy fight. She's fighting a fighter coming off of 4 consecutive losses who she's already beaten before.
The only virtue of the match is that it's for a lesser version of a WBA title that will bring her closer to fighting for the full version of it.
The full version of the title that Mayerling Rivas currently holds, reigning WBA champion, matchroom fighter, that's who Nazarena Romero seems to have her sights set on.
Before it comes to that, she'll be opposite the ring Julieta Cardozo, who in all likelihood, she's going to stop.
In their initial meeting, the first time they met in December of 2020, Nazarena Romero stopped her in just 2 rounds.
Nazarena being one of the more violent punchers at this weight, an artillery fighter, a pressure fighter, and a volume puncher, in all likelihood, this fight is going to end the same way that one did.
Tack on that Julieta is coming off of 4 consecutive losses. Tack on that since she was stopped by Nazarena in late 2020, she's only fought once. That was earlier this year, in March.
It's not going to end well for Julieta.
In 2021, it seems that Nazarena Romero took a hiatus from the sport, and she returned to it late last year in November. So she has fought in the last 12 months, racked up a highlight reel first-round knockout over Paola Ibarra.
That breaks down to about 1 fight in the last 2 years.
Just about. You can see the form and function of this upcoming rematch with Julieta. It may seem unnecessary on the surface, but what it looks like Nazarena is trying to do is gain momentum. She was last in action late last year, and it didn't take her long to get back in action early this year.
Get the sense that what Nazarena Romero wants is to cap off this year with a big title fight.
She's about to run it back with Julieta. In all likelihood, she's going to stop her again, and she may see action at least one more time over the summer months before eventually challenging for the WBA title.
And the virtue of challenging for the WBA title as opposed to the WBC, the WBO, or the IBF is that the WBA title gets you a fight with a matchroom fighter, a matchroom champion, Mayerling Rivas.
Mayerling Rivas fights on the DAZN platform.
She's one of 3 prize stallions Matchroom has in the super bantamweight division. There's Mayerling Rivas, there's Ellie Scottney, there's Ramla Ali.
Ellie Scottney's going to be taking on Shernika Johnson for the IBF title.
And it could end up changing hands. Later on this month, towards the end of it, WBO champion Deborah Dionysius will defend her title against Sigaling Lafarve, the former champion.
Still unbeaten. There's a lot of movement right now at 122 pounds, and the landscape could change by year's end as Nazarena Romero inches closer to a Mayerling Rivas fight.
She might get it. All she's got to do is keep winning, stay in the winner's bracket.
She is one of the more promising unbeaten up-and-comers in today's super bantamweight division, a credible threat to any champion.
And one of the more violent punchers in this division, a knockout merchant.
Look for the ring return of Nazarena Romero next week on the 29th. In men's heavyweight news, former unified champion Anthony Joshua on if he thinks the Deontay Wilder fight will happen in December in Saudi. In terms of it getting delivered from my side, I honestly believe it is 95% 100% there. And for the longest time, there's been a narrative painted that it was Anthony Joshua running from this fight, when it's Anthony Joshua and his team, the people at Matchroom, Eddie Hearn, that have made something like 4 or 5 offers to Deontay Wilder, and Deontay always chose to go the other way. There was always some dissatisfaction, some issue.
Even though Deontay Wilder himself admitted that he was offered more money to fight Anthony Joshua than he stood to make with Tyson Fury, there are still people that try to paint this narrative that it was Anthony that was running from the fight.
They still do this. Even here today, they still prop up that narrative.
And you're not going to get anywhere with those people. You can hold up Deontay Wilder's own words up to their face.
For the longest time, the narrative was that the money from DAZN wasn't even real, that it was a bad deal, only for Deontay Wilder to later admit that he stood to make much more boxing Anthony Joshua than what he stood to make with Fury. And even with that, there are still people out there who are in denial, and you should let them stay there.
Don't waste your fucking time. They're too stupid to process this.
It's an exercise in futility. And that Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder might end up boxing, after all, it's almost too good to be true.
It is.
But according to Anthony, he being Deontay Wilder, he is good. I respect him. I don't undermine him. That will make me raise my game. It's going to be a tough fight, but I am confident in myself. I'm a better, more well-rounded athlete. I'm a better, more well-rounded fighter.
This fight could potentially put to bed a lot of narratives.
Even here today, with no world titles involved, this is one of the biggest fights you could hope to make in the entire sport of boxing. People are still invested. The Anthony Joshua people, that contingent of boxing fans, and what remains of Deontay Wilder's fans, who were eerily absent for his
last fight,
which did next to nothing at the box office. A far cry from the numbers and the metrics that he brought in with Tyson Fury the last 2 times. 800,000 pay-per-view buys sold in the second fight, 600,000 sold in the third.
His last box office fight, his last pay-per-view, his big ring return.
It didn't bring anywhere near those kinds of numbers.
I think the ballpark figure that they put out there was somewhere under 100,000 pay-per-view buys sold. Well under 100,000.
Characterizing how fortunate Deontay Wilder is that after all those poor business decisions and what is a dwindling fan base here in America that isn't as invested in him as they let on.
He's lucky he's still in the conversation for a big fight, because not that long ago what they were talking about was a fight between him and Andy Ruiz, and reportedly, because they couldn't satisfy the fighter's financial demands, it didn't get anywhere.
It never got off the ground, even though the WBC ordered it.
What was it, 4 or 5 months ago in November of last year?
That fight was intended to crown the next mandatory challenger for Tyson Fury, but because the fight never got off the ground, he has no mandatory challenger.
Now, where Deontay Wilder was supposed to be boxing Andy Ruiz, the story is Tyson Fury might end up fighting him.
And who knows what Wilder is about to do? I mean, is he going to have a fight this summer, or is he going to sit out most of this year to preserve himself for that December showdown?
It seems that Anthony Joshua has doubled back on his previous comments, where before he was talking about skipping the summer and returning in December. He's now saying
he would be happy to fight again in July, but for a potential showdown with Deontay Wilder in Saudi Arabia in December, though no decision has been made yet.
He needs to hurry up and make one.
Irrespective of what does or doesn't happen in December, with Deontay Wilder, with Tyson Fury, with whoever, Anthony Joshua needs to get busy. He needs more time with Derek James.
I can't stress that enough. You're not going to all of a sudden become a completely different fighter overnight after just one camp with that guy.
There's more work needs doing. This December showdown, this is intended to be a part of a mega match, a set of mega matches, a mammoth card that would feature both Wilder versus Joshua and Fury versus Usyk.
Sounds too good to be true, I know, but that's the story.
This involves several different promotional outfits and several different platforms. We know that Anthony Joshua is exclusive to the Matchroom banner and the DAZN platform. Tyson Fury, transatlantically, he's with Queensberry in the UK and Top Rank in the US.
Usyk is a network free agent. He can fight on any platform.
Whereas Wilder's situation is a little bit more murky. We don't know here and now that he has any more business or any more ties to either Al Heyman's PBC or Showtime. That if he goes into negotiations for this mammoth card, is there going to be any involvement from them?
You know, it really doesn't look like it, because the financier for this show is the Prince himself.
It's not like Showtime is bankrolling this thing, or the PBC. They're not, and they have their own problems.
The way I see it, the less Al Heyman and his PBC are involved, the better. The more likely they can actually get this fight over the line without any hiccups, without any issues.
No meddling. No meddling from Al Heyman. No meddling from Showtime.
If you think that this weekend's fight involving Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia is a mega fight, if you think that's a mega match, this thing's a monster.
It's a fucking monster. You're talking about $400 million, an estimated $400 million in guaranteed purses to the fighters.
Mammoth interest transatlantically, interest in the show in the United Kingdom, interest in the show in the United States on a global scale, on a global platform, whereas Ryan and Gervonta's fight, good fight that it might be, it's a domestic affair.
Primarily catering to an American audience.
Really aren't all that reliable these days, though I do think this fight will do decent numbers.
But nothing comparable to the worldwide attention that Joshua versus Wilder would get, could get, if they get it, over the line.
And according to Anthony Joshua, at least for his part, the fight is 95% likely to happen.
Provided that there's no involvement from Al Heyman or Showtime on Deontay Wilder's end of it. He might actually go through with this thing too.
So long as he doesn't have those two whispering sweet nothings into his ear.
It might go down. And finally, in reference to this weekend's mega match, Davis versus Garcia and its pay-per-view buys, a surprisingly low number would be satisfactory for Showtime sports head Stefan Espinoza.
A little birdie told me that the size of the pot for this show is somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million.
And if that intel rings true, just to generate the $30 million, just to generate it, raw numbers, they'd have to sell approximately 352,000 pay-per-view buys. I think they can do that.
Raw numbers.
Now, in order to fully clear the $30 million pot and other operational expenses, you'd be shooting for approximately 400,000 pay-per-view buys. 400,000 at a price point of $85. The majority of people think that Saturday's fight will achieve somewhere in the high six digits in terms of domestic pay-per-view buys, with one of the promoters of the event, Oscar De La Hoya, predicting as high as 2 million.
But he's overshooting it. There's no way this fight sells that many pay-per-view buys.
Not in this unstable landscape, this unstable pay-per-view market where piracy is at an all-time high. Stefan Espinoza, the head of Showtime Sports, has taken a much more conservative view of the potential buy rate. The biggest thing we've seen since Mayweather-McGregor was the 800,000 that Canelo versus Plant did. Wilder versus Fury was a little bit below that. Basically, that's been the high watermark. There are plenty of reasons for that, but the biggest has been piracy. No question. That is definitely depressing the number of sales. Espinoza told IFL TV, pay-per-view buys have been plummeting due to how easy it has become to steal events, and the saturation of high-priced pay-per-views is turning away customers, especially in the US, with fighters like Deontay Wilder and Andy Ruiz hitting mid-five-digit numbers for their respective pay-per-view bouts.
Andy's been on pay-per-view 2 times, and those numbers, they were terrible.
Deontay Wilder's numbers for the Robert Helenius fight, a far cry from what he put up with Tyson Fury.
It seems people don't find him that interesting unless he's opposite the ring of Brit.
If we were anywhere in that ballpark, 800,000, I'd be absolutely thrilled. If we exceeded that, then I'll be shocked. Espinoza's expectations of the event have already been increased through early pay-per-view buys, and the numbers generated from the promotion, which have surpassed his more moderate estimates. If we were even at 500,000 buys domestically, that's still bigger than just about anything other than the top 4 to 5 fights we've seen in the last 4 to 5 years. Given where these guys are in their careers, I'll be perfectly satisfied if we ended up sort of in that mid-range.
Stefan Espinoza's conservative projections lend credence to the notion that the size of the pot is, in fact, a $30 million pot.
If the size of the pot is 30 mil, 500,000 pay-per-view buys would cover it, and then some.
800,000 pay-per-view buys would be a massive success.
Espinoza concludes by saying that he'd even be satisfied with as little as 400,000 pay-per-view buys for what is considered a mega event, as it would leave the fighters with multiple times their career high paydays. But he is obviously hoping for more buys.
Yeah, because at just 400,000 pay-per-view buys, that'll cover it. The guaranteed purses and the operational costs, that would be enough for them to break even, to get back what they put in.
Now, most of what you see on Showtime that ends up being a box office fight, most of what they give you, it's not actually pay-per-view worthy. Fights like Benavidez versus Plant, which was a good fight, a solid fight, but not the kind of fight that you should have to climb over a paywall to watch.
It's not.
Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius. I expected it to do much more on the premise that people are sentimental, and at least online, Wilder's got a lot of fans, but those fans weren't anywhere to be found when it came time to purchase the show.
Hindsight being 2020, you could argue that the show would have got a lot more attention, more eyes on it, on regular Showtime than on pay-per-view.
Though given that Deontay Wilder has his own financial demands to satisfy, it ends up being a box office fight in an effort to satisfy them.
To get him the kind of money that he wants, to pay him the way that he wants to be paid. And the issue is, what you think a fight is worth?
Or what you think you should be paid fight by fight, it's got to align with reality. Otherwise, it's going to cost a lot of people a lot of money.
The value of a show varies, fight by fight.
Look, I think part of it is we've all got to turn to each other as boxing fans, and let people know, look, the reality is you can't on one hand complain about not having big fights and, not seeing these fights happen. And then when one does happen, you stream it. So I don't know how you can claim to be a boxing fan and be regularly streaming big fights.
Now that comment from Stephen Espinoza should be directed to those who boast the PBC the most. The guys that'll tell you that Caleb Plant versus David Benavidez is this great fight. It's this great fucking fighter. Wilder versus Helenius.
If you're always carrying on about how great Showtime's boxing programming is, and you're always carrying on about how great these PBC fighters are,
but you're not actually purchasing these pay-per-views, you're not actually buying these fights, Stefan's talking about you.
That's who he's talking to.
Not me, because I've got my receipts and I post them regularly online via social media whenever I do purchase one of these box office fights. For all those guys who carry on about how Gervonta Davis is this big star, this huge star, you tell me why after 5 separate pay-per-view appearances, his numbers are always the same. At or around 200,000.
Now, I anticipate that the numbers for this weekend's fight will be a lot better than what you normally get.
But it's not because of Gervonta Davis's star power. It's because of Ryan Garcia. I mean, if you see an uptick of 400,000 buys or 500, 600, 700.
Whatever this fight does above the customary 200 to 225,000.
Gervonta Davis's normal numbers for a box office fight. Whatever this fight does that's in excess of that, you can directly attribute to Ryan Garcia. Because without him, you don't do those numbers.
You don't. We've got receipts.
Which, in effect, speaks to the argument that the sport of boxing would be better off if Ryan won this weekend's fight than Gervonta. Because Gervonta, without a Ryan, his numbers have plateaued.
That the sport itself would be better off if Ryan won.
In spite of what the vocal minority online would have you believe, without a Ryan Garcia, Gervonta Davis's numbers bottom out.
Men lie. Women lie. Numbers don't.